So Underdog Fantasy dropped Best Ball Mania 5 a little under 3 weeks ago now. And with early sharps getting in, with the NFL schedule now released, there are some players who are clearly identifying themselves as values right now in these drafts. So we're going to cover 7 of those best values in their contest where you can win up to $1.5 million just by drafting a fantasy football team. Let's get into it. So I'm normally against drafting any running back in the first round with how wide receivers are continuously being pushed up the board. We are seeing 34 wide receivers drafted in the first 60 picks on Underdog right now. That is over half of the picks being made as wide receivers. But for me, Breece Hall is a smash in the first round after CMC, after those top 5 wide receivers, your CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra. Breece Hall is a smash for me right away there at pick 7. I was in on him last year figuring, he was being drafted as a running back 20. I figured that was going to be a massive overreaction to his injury and the talent or lack thereof of Dalvin Cook coming into this offense. Breece Hall, from week 6 on last year, he was the running back 2. He only scored 11 less fantasy points than Christian McCaffrey. They also gave him 36 touches in his final 2 of his final 3 games last year. And what do we have changing going into 2024? Let's be honest with ourselves here. They beefed up the offensive line with multiple free agent signings. They went out and drafted Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. Breece's top 2 backups are a 4th and 6th round pick that possess lackluster pass catching ability at best, I would say. And now he's entering into year 2 post ACL, which shows that historically a running back's efficiency is going to increase. That first year back where Breece Hall still somehow averaged 4.5 per carry, which isn't true. I'm going to put that game log back up on the screen here. You can look. I mean, you see, 2.3, 1.5, 3.3. I mean, it was abysmal. He had an abysmal stretch of like 8 weeks where he was below, 3.5 per carry. But I think that's going to improve immensely year 2 off of his ACL injury now. So I'm not going to be surprised, honestly, if in a year from now, we are talking about Breece and CMC as the locked in 101 and 102 in fantasy drafts, just because we may have that level of star in our hands with Aaron Rodgers back on this Jets team now to hopefully orchestrate a high-powered offense this year. So the second player I want to talk about is Mark Andrews. And this one is pretty simple because you just look at the board and who's available around him. And just simply recognizing he is undoubtedly one of the best picks in the 4th to 5th round range. You have George Pickens, who's being drafted 6 spots ahead of him. You have Dalton Kincaid, who's being drafted as the tight end 4 spots ahead of him. You have Keenan Allen with a rookie Caleb Williams surrounded by DJ Moore, top 10 pick Rome Odunze. He's being drafted ahead of Mark Andrews. Terry McLaurin, Jaden Reed, Xavier Worthy are all going within 5 to 7 picks after Mark Andrews. I look at all those guys and I think, Mark Andrews is very clearly the asset I want out of these guys. And I get he's missed time, right? The tight end landscape is changing. You have the rising of Sam Laporta and Trey McBride, but he's the most proven player in this range at a desolate position in fantasy football. He was 3rd in yards per route run of all tight ends last year still. He caught the 2nd most touchdowns in only 10 games at the position, 3rd in fantasy points per target, and 1st in fantasy points per route run. That is an advantage that used to cost you a 2nd round pick. Just a year ago, we were drafting Mark Andrews in the top 3 rounds, and now you can get him. I'm getting him very consistently in the 5th round. This is a no-brainer. Mark Andrews is by far, in my mind, one of the top 4 tight ends you can draft in fantasy football this year. You're getting him in the 5th round. You can stack him with Lamar Jackson. There's a correlation there. If you really get it to fall to you right, you can get that Houston Baltimore week 17 correlation as well. So Mark Andrews, such a smash pick for me at 52.9. Absolutely a must draft. One of the best values. So I get if you want to be skeptical with Anthony Richardson. We only have a 4-game sample size, right? But it was evident he's an absolute cheat code in a game where this man only threw the ball 10 times on 32% of the snaps. He had 17.7 fantasy points because he scored 2 rushing touchdowns. He had 10 plus rushing attempts in 2 of 3 full games last year. These quarterbacks who can run the football, they are absolute cheat codes. A year ago, we were drafting Anthony Richardson as the quarterback 10, the quarterback 11 in Best Ball Mania, and now we are getting him all the way up at the quarterback 5, quarterback 6 already. Now, yes, you do have Jonathan Taylor back as well, but I, frankly, have full confidence in Shane Steichen that he will have these two humming together. You look at Shane Steichen and how he kept this offense moving last year. For Hayden Winks over at Underdog, the Colts were third in plays per minute. You add AD Mitchell to this offense. You return your entire offensive line again as well. You get a lot of continuity there. And I'm not going to frankly be surprised if we see Anthony Richardson finish ahead of both CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes this year, who are both being drafted ahead of him right now. Just because Anthony Richardson has this elite level rushing upside. These are the quarterbacks you want in a competitive contest like Best Ball Mania, where you're competing for up to, first prize, $1.5 million. Anthony Richardson is absolutely a cheat code you want on your team. At where is he at right now? 56.6. Yeah, absolutely. Smash pick for me there. I love Anthony Richardson in the fifth round. I don't blame you if you hate Christian Watson, but frankly, he's going at a price tag where I just cannot resist drafting him with the upside that he has. Is Christian Watson an injury liability? I'd say he somewhat is at this point, sure. Is the pecking order, though, of this Green Bay Packers wide receiver room like unclear at best? I'd honestly say so at this point. You have Jayden Reed, who appears to be the favorite. He's being drafted as the favorite. He's going nearly 30 picks ahead of Christian Watson. He's going 13 wide receivers ahead of Christian Watson. And in Christian Watson's healthy stretch last year from weeks 4 to 13, Jayden Reed was the wide receiver 31, while Watson was the wide receiver 29.5 PPR formats. During that stretch, Watson out-targeted him 52 to 44. He scored 2 more touchdowns, 5 to Jayden Reed's 3. And the only reason why the gap wasn't bigger between these two is because Jayden Reed racked up 83 rushing yards, and one of them was a 32-yard touchdown on an end around. I would much rather take a shot on the big play waiting to happen, dynamite upside of Christian Watson, because we know he can drop 20 on a dime if he's called upon. He did it in back-to-back weeks before missing the rest of the season last year. So Christian Watson, when he's going at nearly pick 86, he's going as the wide receiver 47 off the board. There is nobody I would rather want in that range who can give me 20 on a given week in a Packers wide receiver room that's going to need somebody to step up this year. Look, Raheem Mostert's 32 years old. I get it. You're probably not excited to draft him. And I get it's incredibly unlikely that he repeats his running back 2 finish overall last year. But my question is, are we really swinging the pendulum that far in Devon Achane's favor that Raheem Mostert is now being drafted as the running back 29 at pick 94? Now, I get it's completely logical to assume that Raheem won't produce last year's numbers, but what's illogical then is drafting him as a running back 3 because of that belief. There is no offense with more potential explosiveness than the Miami Dolphins. And the running backs that are going in this range on Underdog around him, you have Tony Pollard, who splitting with Tyjae Spears, who frankly, I'm not going to be surprised if Tyjae Spears actually ends up being the starter in that backfield by the end of the year. Jaylen Warren, nice little piece, but you got Najee Harris there as well. Not as explosive of an offense as well in Pittsburgh. You got Zach Moss. You got Trey Benson, who is the backup to James Conner right now. None of those guys I just listed have the same upside as Raheem Mostert does in the 8th round of these drafts. And really, all we need for Raheem Mostert to pay off on this ADP is to be a boom or bust running back 2. He can be the 40% in a 60-40 split with Devon Achane and still produce top 20 numbers. I get it. The wheels could totally fall off. He's 32 years old. I'm not going to ignore those things. But there is no player I would rather take a bet on in the 8th round than Raheem Mostert because of what we saw last year and what we know Mike McDaniel can do with this offense. Now, frankly, I could probably just kind of copy and paste what I said about Anthony Richardson and put it in here for Jayden Daniels, but it's relatively the same case. And last year, we were drafting Anthony Richardson at this point before he was started to skyrocket up into, the quarterback 11, quarterback 10 range. We're getting Jayden Daniels as the quarterback 13 right now, and he possesses this same elite rushing upside. I wouldn't say he'd finish ahead of Mahomes or Stroud like I did with Anthony Richardson, but the point is that, again, his rushing upside has the opportunity to just break this contest, all right? In the last 5 years, we're just going to talk quarterback rushing. I made the case for Anthony Richardson. I didn't provide any statistical evidence of that, but listen closely here. In the last 5 years, 12 of 16 quarterbacks with at least 110 rushing attempts have finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. That is a 75% hit rate. Now you expand that number to 125 attempts. 9 out of 11 have finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Now, we all know Jayden Daniels' trademark is his mobility, right? You look at the college stats. He had 125 plus rush attempts in 4 of 5 years. He had 21 rushing touchdowns in his final 2 years at LSU. So we look at the quarterbacks then who had at least 7 rushing touchdowns in the last 5 years. 13 of 14 have finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Now, I'm not going to sit here and make you any promises that Washington's offense is going to be dynamite, let alone even completely competent this year. I'm also not going to promise you that Jayden Daniels will be just fine with Terry McLaurin as his top option as a passing quarterback. But what I will promise you is that as long as Jayden Daniels stays healthy, he is one of the easiest bets to pay off at his 106 ADP as the quarterback 13, given his rushing upside. Again, I go back to Anthony Richardson. We were drafting him as the quarterback 10 last year. And Daniels is one I want to get in on now before he jumps to that price, because that quarterback 10 ADP we were drafting Anthony Richardson at was in August. It is currently May 17th. We can play this game before it even happens, right? So let's get in on Jayden Daniels now before he jumps up, 20 picks and becomes a quarterback 10 taken in drafts. All right, last guy we're going to talk about here, Jermaine Burton, rookie wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is a late round guy. We are going late into drafts now. But at this point in drafts, when you're looking at 160 ADP, this is where you start throwing darts on guys you believe have the most upside or mesh well with your teams. They likely won't make that big of a difference, but I honestly believe Jermaine Burton might have the biggest chance to. Let's just start by looking at the guys going around him. I'm going to ramble off a few names and kind of give you the reason why I would rather just take Jermaine Burton over them. You have Ricky Pearsall. Frankly, he's just better in Dynasty than Jermaine Burton. He's the 5th best option for the 49ers currently. I'll pass on that. Quentin Johnston, look, still no hands, got a lot to prove. All right. A little harsh, right? There's just a report that came out yesterday. What was it? OC for the Chargers came out and said, "Oh, he could launch this year. He could go and launch this year." I'm not buying it. Darnell Mooney, 4th Atlanta with Kirk Cousins fresh off an Achilles. I'm somewhat interested in Darnell Mooney, but again, I'll get to why I really like Jermaine Burton. You got Troy Franklin, who had worse draft capital. He's in a worse situation. I don't know why we're drafting Troy Franklin ahead of Jermaine Burton. And you have Jalen Polk, who might be the wide receiver 1 for the Patriots, but it's with Drake May, who really needs time to develop in this Patriots offense. We have to see if they're even going to be somewhat competent this year. Roman Wilson is the other one. He's a wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh, but much more of a floor player. I like Roman Wilson personally. I do have quite a bit of exposure to him, but again, more of a floor player than I think what Jermaine Burton can be, because I'm going to throw up his reception perception profile here, because this is a guy who's attached to Joe Burrow. He can win all over the field despite an underdeveloped route tree. And I would much rather take a shot on that in what will, I think, potentially be a massive bounce back offense this year than all the other guys I just listed. Now, the other reason I believe in Jermaine Burton is because the Bengals last year, they ran the optimal amount of 3 wide receiver sets last year. This is from Ryan Heath, highlighting teams' percentage of 3 wide receiver dropbacks in comparison to the amount of total dropbacks last year. That only stayed up for like 5 seconds. I'm going to keep that up there a little bit longer. Cincinnati, they ran 3 wide receiver sets at the 3rd highest rate last year. And now you have Tyler Boyd, who's in Tennessee. Jermaine Burton has a relatively clear path to being the wide receiver 3 for this team now. And so you believing in his talent, which I do, being paired with Joe Burrow, entering an offense that is quite literally begging him to step up as the wide receiver 3, I think Burton is one of the highest upside players in this range, especially then. I don't think it's likely T. Higgins gets traded, but should he mid-season? Oh my gosh, it could be a potential explosion for Jermaine Burton. So at this point at 160, when you're throwing darts on high upside guys, Jermaine Burton is at the top of the list for me. Alrighty, that's it. That's all I got for you. Our top 7 picks in Best Ball Mania 5 right now. If you want to take your crack at winning $1.5 million in this contest, head over to Underdog Fantasy in the description down below. Sign up with the code FELLAS because they are going to give you up to $250 in bonus money to play with. If you want to come back for more content, we have our least favorite picks in Best Ball Mania 5 coming next week. We got redraft content coming out for you all as well. We got wide receiver rankings and tight end rankings next week. So make sure you subscribe and turn on those notifications so you know when those videos are up. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next time. Deuces.